Okay, so this is a quick video to supplement Peter Bruckner's great documentation that he created about this, changing the IGBTs process. Just wanted everybody to be really clear. So I've removed the cover already, and of course I've removed the plug, the safety interlock connector from behind the driver's seat to disconnect the high voltage battery, and of course you'll want to also disconnect the auxiliary battery so that there's no electricity in this suitcase at all. This suitcase has actually already been removed from another vehicle, so it's not relevant in this particular case, and you'll probably notice that the wires to the motor and the battery connections are missing. Anyway, nonetheless, we're going to go through this more or less in the same sequence as Peter's documentation to make sure that you have a successful exchange of parts. So we're going to be removing the bus bars in here, going to be removing the fan, the inverter, the capacitors, to get all the way down into the bottom there to get at the IGBTs. So first place to start is this connector here. It essentially runs the fan. You just squeeze on that and pull that out. A pair of pliers, needle nose is handy for removing this black wire here. You can do it before or after, but basically you just squeeze that and pop that out through the bracket there. So a Phillips screwdriver onto the bolts down at the very bottom. You don't need to actually unbolt the fan itself. There's a mounting bracket here, and they just simply undo. Of course, wanting to be careful not to lose anything into the bowels of the suitcase. So there's 4 of them. One's hidden down there. A little difficult to get at, but you just pull the wires aside and it comes free. I'm going to actually leave that one in there so that I'll pull it up with the fan. So right here you'll see also there's another connector there that needs to be pulled free, and a screwdriver in there pops that out, and that whole assembly comes free. And so set that aside. You'll need it later, so to speak. So what you can see visible here now is the 3 capacitors. I'm just going to zoom in a little tiny bit here so that you can see that a little better. But the 3 main capacitors that filter the power for the IGBT. Just zoom back out. So there's a set of brackets on here, and the inverter control logic itself that all needs to come out of here. And there's a bunch of connectors as well. So we may as well start with the connectors. It's probably just as easy to pull the connectors off of the EV control box here, just to simply get them out of the way. And so again, squeeze the connector, pull it out, squeeze the connector, pull it out. This is a little strap. You just undo that and that comes free, and you can set that out of the way. This one here is the main control line from the ECU to the inverter. And again, there's a little push tab, and you pull that up, and again, just get that out of your way. This black line you'll have to manage with as you move forward. This one here, again with a pair of pliers, just pinch that black plastic mounting thing there, and it pulls through the metal. Same thing here. Some of them are more of a struggle than others, naturally. If this was easy, anybody could do it. So again, just get that, and it just gives you a little bit more room there to maneuver these bus bars. There's a red one at the top and a black one at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to remove this bracket here. There's a couple of yellow Phillips head bolts in there. Remove those. And then there's just a couple of Phillips screws in here as well. And that frees up that whole bracket. Alright, so that comes out like so. Set it aside. And then down here you'll see you've got this other part of this bracket, which you may or may not need to remove actually. Okay, so to get down below the capacitors now, to remove this whole assembly, the capacitors are attached to the inverter control logic board. So you need to remove 4 hex head bolts down there. You need a long Allen key to get those freed up. Or some other kind of a tool that is essentially a long, small extension on a hex head to be able to undo those. Okay, so you need a long hex tool wrench in order to be able to Allen key, they call it as well, I guess. And you need to get that right down in there. Make sure it's the right size. You don't want to strip those out. I always find it easier to have a little bit of leverage at the top here because they are a little on the snug side, and then get them loose. They don't need to come all the way out. They just need to be loosened, and you kind of get a feel for it because they kind of wobble around in there because the bolts themselves are captured in the frame. So you just need to undo them. And these are the main, the bus bars down there, and these capacitors are all interconnected across all of the IGBTs. So that 288 volts to 300 volts, that's your battery pack voltage, comes through here on these red and black bus bars, which connect into this these bus bars that run across the top of all the IGBTs. And that delivers the full voltage to each of them. This one here is a little bit of a nuisance because you don't have much turning radius. And a little socket with an Allen key on it is helpful in this particular case. Alright, so that comes until it's loose. Some of them do come out just because they're the way the capture works. Some of them don't. And then this one on this far side, there's another one adjacent to it which is connected to the bus bar, and we'll get to that in a minute. Alright, so again, loosen that off. So that's the first row of 4. The next row of 4 is in behind it, and the same procedure, basically. Loosen them off until it looks like they're no longer in there, and then you can pull that whole assembly out once we've got all these disconnected. So that's now looking like it's free. You can kind of wiggle it in there. You can't get it out yet because we've got to get those bus bars off. But that gets that free. The next part is this red bus bar. It's covered in red tape, and it's got a 10 millimeter or an 11 millimeter bolt down there that holds it onto the bus. Along with below it is a black bus bar. So there's two bolts down there, which we'll just try and zoom into. The focus isn't so good, but there we go. It's a little better. We're just going to point these out with the screwdriver. So right here is two bolts. These are the Allen keys that we just undid. So you want to get those out of there. And I believe they're 10 or 11 millimeters. You need a long extension, of course, to get into there. And straight down there. So down into there. It's handy to have one of these wrenches that you can turn at the top, because these are difficult to get at. And you might lose one, in which case you'll want a little magnetic tool to pick it up. But that undoes the black one. Alright, that's got that, and indeed I lost it in there. So we'll just get the red one here now. And the reason we undid that orange cable was to be able to get into there, like so. And again, undo that one. So that's undone the inverter side of the bus bar, which brings the high voltage from the batteries to the inverter. Okay, so back here now is the other side of the red bus bar. You need a 12 millimeter socket on there to get that undone. And that will undo quite easily. It's a little tight, but it comes off easy enough. Snaking it out is a little bit more difficult. So you want to get that nut off, get that wire off, which needs to go back on. And then just pull this out. It basically just snakes through there like that. That's the bus bar. It's just taped to isolate it. Kind of interesting, 300 volts red tape, but that's how that works. So now a little deeper here, a little bit more difficult to get at, is the black bus bar, which is all the way down inside the bowels of the suitcase, and you need to get down to that. So again, a longer extension on the tool to get in there. All the way down there. And it's the one that's closest to the inverter, and you just get that started. A little bit longer extension would be better. I couldn't find mine today, but it comes off easy enough. Get that bolt nut off of there. Alright, let's get that out, and you can get your hand down in there relatively easily to finish off undoing that, and then pull it up. If you lose it, a little magnetic tool is helpful, but there we go, we didn't lose that one. And again, that black bus bar, fingers down in there, and just kind of wiggle it out, and that's the black bus bar. So that's now free. And now the theory is that this comes out. So you can see I'm kind of pulling on that. And a couple of those connectors, or maybe bolts, are still connected. So we're just going to try and free those up a little bit. There's also a connector on this far left-hand side, which you need to pull out. And once you get it free... Okay, there we go. So you see that just comes out. And this is the connector on this side. A little difficult view there with my light in the way, I guess. but there's a black connector right at the end of this inverter control board, and again it's one of these squeeze and pull connectors, and it just comes free. And then just kind of wiggle that out of there carefully, and you'll see that as you're wiggling that there's a bunch of connectors at the bottom here which need to be removed. I was hoping to be able to show you here. There you go. So here you can see there's 1, 2, 3 connectors on there, and they need to come free. And again, it's a squeeze and pull. Each one of those, 1, 2, 3, they go back into the same place that they came from when you put the whole thing back together. But that's the inverter control logic board. Essentially the ECU talks to it, and then it talks to each of the IGBTs in the bottom here, which we've now exposed. So setting that aside for later installation. So now we'll just zoom in here again a little bit. There are 1, 2, 3 IGBTs that essentially run the motor in the car. And the easy opportunity to get those 2 bolts out that I lost on the bus bars as I was working on that. So now you can see that the 3 phases of the AC motor are connected to each one of these IGBTs. And so the first thing to do is to disconnect those wires. That's the other side of that capacitor bracket, which you really don't actually need to undo. And so that comes out of there. You'll see here that this IGBT has a couple extra wires on it, and Bill talks about that in his documentation. We'll get to that in a moment. But for the first thing we're going to do, I've already removed the wires from the motor here because I pulled that out already, because this is out of another car. And so what we're going to do is just undo these ones down here. They look like they're 10 millimeters. That's correct. And we'll get those off. So do try and organize your bolts that you've taken out so they go back into the right place. Sometimes the lengths are a little bit different, and so you may want to have a sheet of paper with some labels on it and locations, and put all of the bolts in the corresponding label so that you make sure that they go back into the place that they came from. Alright, and that comes out pretty easy. This is an interesting little control board. It monitors, I think, the current. It's got current sensors on there to each of the phases. That's how the ECU knows whether or not there's some kind of a failure. So that's disconnected the 3 electrical connections. There's a couple of mechanical connections here that hold that bracket down. You want to get those out. And there again, the 10 millimeter. They're relatively easy to get to. There we go. And actually there's 2 more on the there as well. There's actually 4 bolts holding that brown plastic bracket to the heat sink of the suitcase at the bottom. So let's get those out. Gloves are a good thing. As you can see, I've already hurt myself, and I've also got silicone paste all over my hand. Because there's a lot of silicone paste in here, essentially the heat sink goop that makes sure that all of the heat is being dissipated through the heat sink from these IGBTs and other devices. Alright, so then that's now free, and it'll come out, except that the next part here is a brown bracket here which holds the opposite end of the bus bar coming across the IGBTs, and there's 2 bolts there that is connected to this whole wiring harness here, which is connected to inverter number 3. So we're going to loosen that off while we're here, so that when we get those IGBTs loose, they'll just pop out. So just loosen that off, that one off, and then we'll have a conversation about these IGBTs. Okay, so just loosen that off and that one off. All of these ones are painted yellow on the top and are basically the same size. So again, that just pulls right out. Bolts out of there. This is now essentially free to come out, but you can see it's physically attached to this IGBT. So what we're going to do right now, just to clear the decks here, is we're going to remove these 3 IGBTs, which is essentially what you're after. It may be that only one of your IGBTs, or maybe 2 of your IGBTs are actually blown, but because I've sourced brand new IGBTs, I think from an operational perspective, to eliminate you having to test the individual IGBTs, it's just simpler and more cost effective to replace all 3, especially given the work that it takes to get in here and take it all apart. So these 4 screws pop out. What's important at this point, and that's again covered in Peter's documentation there, is that these need to be torqued down to I think it's 3 foot-pounds to be sure that the heat sink is bolted to the plate below. And you can see there's a bit of suction going on there. It doesn't actually want to come up, and so you have to kind of break that suction of the silicon compound to get them to pop out. Let's just get that going. You can see it slides around plenty good, but it doesn't want to break free. There you go. So you slide it around enough and it breaks free, and that's the IGBT. And what we're doing with these is essentially pulling the little daughter board off, which is Toyota specific, along with this connector, attaching it to a brand new IGBT, and then doing a full testing of the device to make sure that it's okay. And so number these as you take them out doesn't really matter in terms of 1 and 2, but 3 of course is important. And so that's number 1 removed, and set it somewhere. Well, let's take these screws out and I'll just show you this, because this is the messy part. And actually, as I'm pulling these out, there's an important element here. There's a brass washer right there that's important that it go back in order to make sure that they're properly secured to your plate. So hang on to those. Don't send them back to me with the core, the IGBTs, which you're going to send back to me, because we need these to rebuild the next set for somebody else, because this part here is unavailable anywhere and is critical to continuing to build these. So these are kind of messy, so you know, it gets all over the place. I don't think it's not toxic, but it's messy. So set those aside where they won't make too much of a mess, and then continue on to get the other one out. Okay, and again, I'm going to slide that around, get that free. And there we go. And so again, that comes out, and reminding you to take the screws out and the little washers that are on there, and hang on to those. Don't send them to me. They're critical to you. And of course, it's easy to drop them inside the car as well. There we go. So that's, make sure you hang on to those. Okay, so that's the 3 IGBTs, or 2 of them. And you can see I dropped one of those little washers, and you want to hang on to those. And may as well retrieve some of these bolts while we're here. So now we're down to the last one, which is connected to here. This has got some current monitoring circuitry in it, and we're just going to go over that in a moment. Okay, and so now this entire assembly comes out, and we're just going to get these bolts all out of here and these washers out of here, and then we're going to look more closely at this. Okay, so once we've got this whole third IGBT out, yeah, there's another connector here, which again you have to squeeze in order to free up this brown bracket, right? And that's going to go back into here when you reassemble it. The other thing that needs to come off here is this metal bracket. You know, there's no need to send that piece to me. It just makes the packaging bigger. And then these are the parts that I need returned so that I can rebuild another set for the next person that needs one of these. So it's just 3 screws that come off, and that metal frame stays with you. And that's essentially the disassembly of this whole thing. And then what you're going to get is you're going to get 3 of these IGBTs that are rebuilt and tested, so that you know that you've got 3 good IGBTs to go into your vehicle. And you basically put it back in the reverse order in which you took it out. Make sure you get some of this silicon material, because the new ones won't have any silicon on them. And you can get that at the Source or Radio Shack or some electrical supply house. Heatsink compound, silicon heatsink compound. And put a little dollop on the back side, smear it around a little bit. But once it's set in there, it's going to spread out around it as you tighten it up. And so make sure that you put these little washers back in there. That's fundamental to them being secured to the frame below. And they go back into the little hole that they came out of. And then put those screws in and torque it down, 3 foot-pounds I believe it is, with a good torque wrench. You don't want to be really guessing. This one here is, it's not a big one like you'd use on your car for torquing your head down or anything. It's the next scale down that has a much more refined capacity at lower torque, so about 3 foot-pounds. And then that makes sure that all of the heat that's generated in these things is coupled to the heatsink below, which is of course connected into the water cooling system. And that's really as simple as it is. You should have full success with that. Okay.